Baby boomers are the wealthiest generation in the history of America, holding $83.3 trillion of wealth, with the average net worth at $1.2 million. However, that number doesn't tell the full story, because like the rest of America, that wealth isn't shared equally. A small group of ultra-wealthy boomers push that average up, while the median boomer has a net worth closer to $200,000. And although that might sound like a lot of money, when stretched over a 30-year retirement, that is $660 a month. And when you add in Social Security, the median retiree has about $2,600 a month to live. Which is very difficult given rising healthcare costs, high inflation, and record high housing prices. And so in order to fill that gap and be able to afford to retire, many boomers are doing one of two things. The first thing they're doing is working longer. 1 out of 5 people over 65 are currently employed. The other option is something that is becoming increasingly popular, and that's packing up your things, leaving America, and retiring in a country the weather is warmer, the pace of life is slower, and your money goes much further. Many boomers are leaving America to be able to live out their golden years in dignity. In fact, according to the Social Security Administration, nearly 760,000 Americans claim Social Security abroad, which is almost double what it was 25 years ago. And so the question of this video is, why is this happening? How did we go from a country that promised a comfort retirement at old age to one where you have to leave to survive? And in this video, that's the story I want to tell. And I want to talk about how the modern image of retirement was created, why it isn't working for the boomers, and what retirement abroad actually means. And so to understand why so many boomers are leaving, we first need to understand the past and go back about 60 years ago when the modern image of retirement was being invented. Chapter 1, the marketing of retirement. For most people, when they imagine retirement, they imagine warm climates, golf carts, RVs, and not having to worry about money. But very few people question, where did this image of retirement come from? Because for most of history, retirement didn't look like this. It was more about declining while living off family support or in poverty. This modern, more glamorous image of retirement is actually very new and was invented by advertisers, developers, and corporations in post-war America. You see, back in the 1960s, retirement was becoming an industry due to decades of perfect conditions. The post-World War II boom provided stable jobs to many, strong labor unions gave workers future security, and new government programs expanded healthcare and income support, which created a new market of healthy 60-year-olds with money to spend. And with this new market, businesses saw the opportunity to sell them their golden years. And throughout the 60s, retirement started to be packaged and sold. The first ever retirement community was created in Arizona called Sun City that had shuffleboard courts, recreational centers, and no children in sight. It was selling this idea that retirement wasn't about decline, but it was about reaping the benefits of a lifetime of work. And as time passed, we'd see advertising to seniors really start to pick up. As travel companies started to push cruises and safe experiences, insurance companies pushed financial products for stability, and companies like John Deere pushed consumer products to make life easier. For the first time in history, a generation over 60 was healthy and had disposable income, which created this new market that ultimately created how we view retirement today. But nowadays, that dream has become more and more out of reach. And so let's talk about why that is in Chapter 2, the challenges of living longer. Now, there are many reasons why this old image of retirement is fading away, but perhaps the biggest reason is that people are just living a lot longer. For example, in the 70s, the average 65-year-old male expected roughly 13 years in retirement, whereas nowadays, the average 65-year-old might expect 20 to 30 years in retirement. And that extra decade or two drastically changes the math. Under the old system, somebody would work and save for 40 years to retire for 10, which is pretty attainable for most economic classes. But nowadays, many people are expecting to work and save for the same 40 years, but retire for 25 years, which is much more challenging and really only attainable for high-income earners. Nowadays, to retire comfortably, you need to save 2 to 3 times more than you did in the 1960s in the same duration of time, which is just not realistic for many people. And for boomers, it didn't help that as they were coming of age, pensions were disappearing, 401k put all the responsibility on the individual, jobs became less stable, and wages stagnated. Life is more complex now than it was in the 60s, but it's also important to note that this longer retirement is also partially driven by medical advancements. However, those medical advancements are also making retirement cost a lot more. According to a report by Fidelity in 2025, a 65-year-old retiring in 2025 can expect to pay $172,500 for healthcare expenses throughout their retirement. Now, if you are at retirement age, navigating healthcare can be a difficult process. And right now, from October 15th to December 7th is open enrollment period. Which is why I'm excited to talk about today's sponsor, Chapter Medicare Advisors. Now, obviously, I am not old enough to be on Medicare, but after seeing my parents struggle to get on for the first time, I understand that it can be a very overwhelming process, where it's hard to know where to start or even who to trust. In fact, the Department of Justice filed a massive fraud complaint against 3 of the largest Medicare brokers in the country that misled seniors, steering them to insurance plans that paid the highest kickbacks. They weren't given the best plans, but the most profitable ones, and Chapter was founded by people whose parents were scammed and vowed to fix the system. Chapter is a fully independent Medicare advisor that advocates for you, not the insurance company. They are the only national advisors that search every Medicare plan available to find the one that best suits your needs. They will walk you through a no-pressure process, exploring different plans, making sure your doctors are covered, and checking to see if you qualify for extra benefits. Chapter is a free resource to use, and folks have saved on average $1,000 a year. So if you need free, unbiased help with Medicare this open enrollment period, consider giving Chapter a call at the number on the screen. By calling that number, it not only helps support this channel, but you will be connected to a real person that can help you navigate the difficult process of Medicare. And so let's continue on our story with the high cost of living. And on top of healthcare, life has gotten more expensive in every area of a person's budget. Property taxes, insurance, home maintenance, food, energy, and debt payments have risen. And all of these factors have made funding a 30-year retirement a lot more difficult. And so let's break down the numbers in Chapter 3, the retirement gap. Now, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, in 2022, the average household expenses for retirees was $54,975 a year. And with investments in Social Security, the median retiree has a yearly income of $32,000, which leaves a gap of about $20,000. And let me just stop here and say that this is not the reality for all boomers. In fact, some boomers have more than enough money to retire comfortably and are surrounded by people who are in the same situation, who have paid off homes, healthy portfolios, and financial stability. But for others, retirement is a daily struggle defined by debt, rent payments, and rising prices. And these two worlds rarely overlap, creating a distorted picture of what retirement looks like in America. But the reality is, when you look at the numbers, many retirees are struggling. According to the Social Security Administration, 63% of recipients rely on Social Security as at least half their income, while 27% rely on it as their only source of income. And for those retirees who are struggling, retirement is less about freedom and more about survival, and they're constantly forced to make tough decisions, like delaying medical care, living extremely modestly, and skipping vacation. And their financial lives are a ticking time bomb where there's no cushion, no safety net, no margin for error. And eventually, it becomes impossible to keep living on such a limited income. And ultimately, in order to fill the gap, they are left with two different options. And so let's talk about the first one, Chapter 4, the working retirement. Working retirement is on the rise for boomers. In fact, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, about 1 out of 5 people over 65 are working jobs, which is up from about 1 out of 10 in 1986. And although working in retirement can have its benefits, like giving you purpose, structure, or getting you away from your house or spouse, it also comes with its challenges. Firstly, if you are receiving Social Security, the government caps how much you can earn at $23,400 until you reach full retirement age. So you can't get a full-time job and are often left with low-wage physical jobs in service, retail, or gig work. And because these jobs often pay under $15 an hour, they're still left living paycheck to paycheck and are struggling. Another challenge is that these jobs are often very physically demanding, and their bodies ache, their energy is lower, and they're more likely to suffer from workplace injury. And the worst part about it is there is no end in sight. They are working beyond when they imagined. Yet for many, there is no alternative. They have to keep working in order to fill the gap. However, recently, some retirees have discovered a cheat code, one that allows them to reclaim their freedom and dignity without making any more money. And that is by leaving America. And let's talk about that in Chapter 5, the New American Dream. In the past decade, there has been a movement that has quietly been growing in America, and that is leaving the country in order to retire. Because while $32,000 will barely get you by in America, in another country like Thailand, it will go 3 times as far. And this has become a trend that has been rapidly growing. Hundreds of thousands of Americans are leaving America in search for a better life. As I said earlier, nearly 760,000 Americans now receive Social Security benefits while living overseas, almost double what it was 25 years ago. And some of the most popular destinations that people are moving to are Mexico, Thailand, Portugal, Costa Rica, and the Philippines, where life is slower, more simple, and warmer. And these places are beautiful. You have popular destinations like Chiang Mai in Thailand, Algarve in Portugal, and Manuel Antonio in Costa Rica. It's paradise, but many people aren't doing it to chase paradise, but they're chasing affordability. They want to retire with dignity on what would be considered a low income in America. And when you look at the numbers, it's very obvious why people are making the leap. And so let's look at the numbers, starting with the small things. In the United States, the cost of a cup of coffee is about $6, whereas in Portugal and Thailand, it's going to cost you under $1.50. In the United States, a meal at a sit-down restaurant for one might cost you $20, whereas abroad, it'll be a half or a third of that. By moving to another country, your money goes much further, which allows you to enjoy the simple things more on a day-to-day basis. But what about the big things? Well, when it comes to transportation, in the US, you might spend $400 a month for your car, but abroad, most people don't need a car and might spend under $50 walking or with public transportation. For groceries, you might spend $500 a month in the US, whereas in Portugal and Thailand, it's a half or a third of that. By leaving, you are getting more bang for your buck. But what about the biggest expense, housing? Well, in Florida, in this retirement community with mortgages and various fees, it'll cost you about $2,364 a month. Whereas in Portugal, you can rent this flat with many amenities for just $830 a month. And in Thailand, you can get this 2-bedroom house for $168 a month. It is truly incredible how far the dollar goes abroad. And in total, in the US, to live a comfortable life, you might be spending about $4,000 a month. But in Portugal, a better lifestyle might cost you $2,500 a month. And in Thailand, it's closer to $1,500 a month. For people on a budget, it's very tempting to look at these numbers and just make the plunge to move abroad. However, while this looks good on paper, once people make the decision to move and ultimately stay for a while in these destinations, they might realize that it is not the paradise that they originally thought. Which brings me to Chapter 6, the reality of being an expat. Now look, I am 32 years old, and I can do my research and use my imagination on what it's like to retire nowadays. But the truth is, I will never truly understand it because I haven't retired yet. However, when it comes to living abroad, I can speak from experience. I served in the Peace Corps in Ecuador for over 2 years. And although I wasn't retired during that time, although I didn't work too much, I did experience what it truly means to live in a foreign land for an extended amount of time. And on one hand, all the benefits that people say are true. The cost of living is drastically lower, the food is more natural, and life is slower and more simple. Those things are great, but living abroad also comes with so many challenges that you don't foresee until you're on the ground living there. And as someone who has experienced life as an expat, these are some common challenges that I think that everyone experiences. 1, language and cultural barriers. If you fully want to live in another country, you have to at least learn a little bit of the language in order to get by. And if your language skills are limited, daily things like getting a cup of coffee, riding in a taxi, or going to a bank will become a daily challenge. And if you do speak the language, like I spoke Spanish when I was living in Ecuador, you don't connect with people as well as you do in your own culture, because you realize that communication isn't just about words, but it's about a shared cultural experience, and things like humor, politeness, and cultural concepts don't always translate. And that can make you feel distant from everyone else. Another challenge is never understanding what's going on. When I was living in Ecuador, I came to the realization that no matter how long I lived there, or no matter how well my Spanish was, I never truly understood what was going on. For example, in Ecuador, there is always something that comes up, like protests blocking the roads, power or water outages, or government offices suddenly closing for reasons that nobody could explain. All the Ecuadorians understood what was going on, but I didn't, because I didn't grow up in that system. And after a while, constantly being confused gets so tiring. Another challenge is sketchy healthcare. One thing that's very appealing when it comes to retiring abroad is the healthcare is a lot cheaper. However, sometimes cheaper can mean worse care. For example, when I was in Ecuador, I got a filling in my tooth. And for a year later, I felt pain in that tooth until finally I returned to the US, the filling popped out, I went to the dentist, and they had to redo the entire job. I also had a friend that had to get 2 teeth pulled when he got back to the US because of bad dental practices. And this was one of the best dentist offices in the country. When you looked at the office, the facility looked identical to what it looks like in the US. But in practice, they weren't held to the same standards as us. And of course, this is not true everywhere, but it is a reality that me and many of my friends experience while getting healthcare abroad. And the final challenge I'll mention is always being perceived as an outsider. If you move abroad, chances are you are going to look very different from everyone else. And because of that, people are going to have some preconceived notions about you. They'll probably think you have a lot of money, you're naive, and you're not there to stay. And because of that, you might be charged higher prices, be taken advantage of, or never be viewed as one of them. And that's something you can't escape. No matter how fluent you are in the language or how long you live there, you're always going to be viewed as the foreigner. And look, I always thought that I was going to be the person that would spend my entire life abroad. But after 2 years of doing it, I was ready to come home because it taught me the beauty of effortlessly communicating, understanding cultural context, and feeling like an insider. But it's truly hard to understand these things until you are abroad doing it. And many retirees that move abroad, not all of them, but many ultimately realize that the experience is a lot harder than they think. And although it might be cheaper, sometimes that cheapness might not make up for what you give in the process. And so now that I've told the full story, let's finish this video off with Chapter 7. Where do we go from here? Alright, another great deep dive story in the books. We have uncovered the marketing of retirement, the challenges of living longer, the financial gaps, and the pros and cons of retirement abroad. And the question is, what do we do with all this information? Well, if there's just one thing this story teaches us, it is that retirement is this ever-changing story. It used to mean a few quiet years at the end of your life. Then as people started to live longer and earn more, it became a 10-year reward for hard work. But now people are living longer than ever, costs are higher than ever, and the systems built to support retirement haven't kept up. Things are never simple, and so as always, as the student of the topic presenting it to the class, I want to share 3 takeaways that I personally learned while making this video. 1. Everything comes with trade-offs. No matter what you do in this world, everything is going to come with a trade-off. Moving abroad might give you cheaper rent, but it also might make you feel isolated. Working longer might give you more security, but it can damage your spirit. Every path has its price, and so I think if we want to live rich lives, it starts by asking the question, what trade-offs am I willing to live with? Because in life, you don't escape the trade-offs, you just pick the ones that you're willing to live with. 2, live life with low standards. I think a huge problem that we have in our American culture is that we're constantly chasing more in order to get fulfillment in life. We chase the constant car upgrades, the newest accessories, and the larger houses, and before we know it, our lifestyle has created so many financial problems. I think the key to a happy life and a happy retirement is simply to have much lower standards. And what I mean by that is learning to be satisfied with less. Because when your standards are simple, life costs less, there's less that can go wrong, and you feel more grateful for what you have. And my final takeaway is stop chasing the old version of the American dream. The American dream is constantly changing. It used to mean consumerism, abundance, and excess. However, in today's world, that leads people to debt, stress, and a life focused on survival. And I think the new American dream shouldn't be about abundance anymore, but it should be about sustainability. Learning to live within your means, having control over your time, and finding freedom in enough. Because at the end of the day, these people who are retiring abroad are ultimately just chasing a more simple life with more financial security. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a like, subscribe for more videos like it. And if you want to hear another very interesting story where I compare what retirement looks like with $0 versus $1 million saved, give this video a watch next. And with that, muchas gracias, que tenga un buen día. Nos vemos, chicos.